are scenes of panic and pandemonium at Kabul airport today as desperate people pour onto the runway trying to flee the country in what can only be described as a chaotic exodus. Now, people are literally clinging on to US military aircrafts as they try to take off.
I stand squarely behind my decision.
The president acknowledging he was wrong about how swiftly Afghanistan would fall.
The retreat of Soviet military power from Afghanistan is complete. The last of Russia's regular army invasion force is out.
In these areas, the Taliban walk around with their guns. There's no government here.
After a 20-year absence from power, the Taliban had taken control of Afghanistan, a move that was met with outrage by most of the international community. Losing that support will be costly for the Taliban, the nation's economy, and its people.
Afghanistan, why nations fail and where do we go next? Looking at the poorest 10 countries on Earth, you will find that by almost every metric, all of them are in Africa, except one, Afghanistan. We take this black hole of GDP for granted. Afghanistan is an enormously rich and strategically located country. From the mid-1800s, Afghanistan has bordered at least one of the most powerful economies on Earth. It bordered the British Raj. It bordered the USSR through its modern northern border with Turkmenistan. It borders China today through the same pass that the Silk Road once passed through, the Wakhan Corridor. Even with these phenomenal potential trading partners, it has instead found itself embattled with at least one world power at every stage of its modern history. 32 years before the Biden administration announced a retreat from Afghanistan, the USSR did the same before its imminent collapse.
The retreat of Soviet military power from Afghanistan is complete.
The periods before these retreats mark some of the fastest debt-building periods in the history of these world superpowers. Why doesn't it have a successful government and economy after all this time? How did it have such limited economic systems and such weak democracy with over $1 trillion in mineral resources within its borders and easy access to 3 of the largest markets in the world? How could the Taliban turn their economy around now that the occupation is over? Before we cover why Afghanistan has failed, it is important to understand the cultural differences and why democratic capitalist politics have not taken to the majority of modern Afghanistan individuals, or more importantly, those who have taken control of the country. There are 3 predicates for democratic capitalistic political culture. 1. Competitive elections and markets. Most importantly, political authority is intrinsic to the society. In simple terms, power comes from the people, of the people, by the people, for the people, as opposed to the power being extrinsic to the society revealed by God. If truth is plural, political plurality, and more importantly, market competition, can grow from a loyal opposition. If nobody has the ideals and words of God in their pocket, then it is logical for businesses to compete. Given the 99.7% of Afghanistan is Islamic and a historical majority believes that their government is appointed by God and is an instrument of God, the destiny of that copper mine to be dictated and run by the government and vicariously God is much more logical than allowing foreign investors, trading partners, or local industrious entrepreneurs to take control of and benefit from these resources. This isn't a universal sentiment in the Islamic world, and this isn't a concept unique to Islam. However, it is something that affects the economics of theocracies. 2. Rule of law and private property rights. In the West, we take for granted this notion. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This pillar of secular humanism, penned by Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, is not self-evident to many individuals outside of Western culture. In an environment where 99% of people believe that one truth exists and that individuals among them are capable of representing this truth, why should that voice be considered equal to an average citizen? Why should I let someone keep their business when they are not directly aligned with my vision for the country? Why should someone who wins 51% of the vote hold 100% of the power after an election if my candidate holds 100% of the voice of my God? The answer of democracy is great is non-trivial, and we should not be surprised that Afghanistan or other Middle Eastern countries do not choose to open themselves to outside markets and adopt our democratic norms. This also isn't necessarily a measure of economic successes. China does not have rule of law to this day, and they seem to do fine without it. However, it is key to understand that for a country to become a realized Western-style democracy, the culture must be one where the members of the society and government hold their leadership accountable. 3. Liberal rights to speech and association. A culture that cannot tell the difference between a church, a business, and a political party must tolerate dissent within all of these spheres or none of these spheres. The long-term respect to allow those who oppose and compete with you and those you support is an important part of creating safe places for independent businesses to flourish. Even if you have a truly voracious agricultural class like that which makes Afghanistan the #1 producer of heroin and #1 producer of hashish, it is an entirely different matter allowing those intelligent, industrious individuals the time and freedom necessary to develop industry. It takes trusting them to not turn against you and trusting for a long period of time. Trust of this manner and freedom to develop the country has not been seen since the 1960s, a period many progressive Afghans refer to as a golden decade for the country. How culture and the economy changed in Afghanistan. During the period of 1963 to 1973, Afghanistan's monarch Zahir Shah coordinated with Afghan intellectuals and technocrats to briefly shape a more progressive nation. This period marked the most significant GDP growth per capita in the country's modern history, doubling from $78 in 1963 to $173 in 1974. Even accounting for inflation, these numbers are not a sign of prosperity. Afghanistan was then, as it is now, a poor developing country. However, under King Zahir Shah, this country had a new direction and a vision for their future. It had pushed for elections, political rights, and women's education. The country had received its own autobahn-type route, the Salang Pass Highway, and many of the industries were blooming. In this time, Afghanistan was playing both sides of the Cold War, receiving 50% of foreign investment from Russia and 30% from America. Ultimately, the Shah regime was toppled via the first cousin of the king and previous autocratic leader taking revenge, Mohammad Daoud Khan. King Zahir Shah's constitution with elected members and the separation of powers was replaced, banks were nationalized, and parliament dissolved. Although Daoud was committed to Afghanistan's neutrality in the Cold War, Daoud pushed the country into a corner with autocratic rule. Daoud's actions paved the way for the rise of the Soviet-backed People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan, PDPA. In 1978, the PDPA, with help from members of the Afghan National Army, seized power from Daoud Khan in what is known as the Sal Revelation. From this point on, the country has been less a coherent state and more a battleground, the opposite of a poverty trap, and a poster child for the resource curse. The resource curse is an axiom where countries that have the most resources also have less economic growth, less democracy, or worse development outcomes than countries with fewer natural resources. The major effects of a resource curse are Dutch disease, revenue volatility and enclave effects, and human capital stagnation. Afghanistan and Dutch disease. In economics, the Dutch disease describes a causal relationship between the increase in the economic development of a specific sector and a decline in other unrelated sectors. We aren't talking about the electric car industry growing and the automobile industry shrinking. It describes things like manufacturing outputs increasing and simultaneously agricultural outputs failing. The term was coined in 1977 by the economists to describe the decline of the manufacturing sector in the Netherlands after the discovery of the large Groningen natural gas field in 1959. The mechanism by which this occurs is that as revenues increase in the growing sector, or inflows of foreign aid like the massive funding both sides of all Afghanistan conflicts receive, the given nation's currency appreciates compared to currencies of other nations. This butterfly effect results in the nation's other exports becoming more expensive for other countries to buy, and imports becoming cheaper, making those sectors less competitive. Revenue volatility, enclave effects, and human capital stagnation. Revenue volatility is trivial. The revenue of the country has less to do with how much they produce, how efficient they are, or how business savvy they are, and more to do with the price their given resource fetches at market. This component of the resource trap is the type that could be seen play out in Venezuela as oil's price crashed. Mismanaged or undiversified economies will be disproportionately affected by price fluctuations and often experience worse economic growth outcomes in the long run due to this. Enclave effects are an extension to this. Oil production generally takes place in an economic enclave, meaning it has few direct effects on the rest of the economy. It's how political scientist Michael L. Ross describes that there are limited economic linkages with other industries in the economy, with some coveted resources like oil. Consequently, economic diversification may be delayed or neglected by the authorities in the light of the high profits that can be obtained from limited natural resources. This makes sense. Training young men how to effectively mine for gold and teaching them to build mining equipment doesn't teach them how to build websites, or taxes, or lots of other very useful economic skills. However, most of your intelligent talent will be sucked into these lucrative endeavors, hence the human capital stagnation. Why should a sparkling example of a great worker, Mr. Hugh Mann, get involved in software engineering for $8 an hour when he can make $40 an hour from working in a mine or for an oil company? For Afghanistan, this effect can be measured in terms of the foreign aid individuals have received. Not only is Afghanistan a literally dangerous location to start a business, it also hasn't been the most lucrative endeavor for individuals to pursue at many points in Afghanistan history. This shows that the country's poor figures are actually much worse than they appear. When observing the country's GDP, you'll notice GDP more than quadrupled from approximately $4 billion in 2002 to $19.8 billion per annum in 2020. So, is Afghanistan an economic miracle? No. The United States of America alone has provided nearly $130 billion of funds to Afghanistan, although $10 billion in aid was recovered from Afghanistan's central bank during evacuation. Since 2002, the United States has provided nearly $88 billion in security assistance, $36 billion in civilian assistance, including $787 million specifically intended to support Afghan women and girls, and nearly $3.9 billion in humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan. This number doesn't even include funds provided by allies like Canada and the UK. During the United States occupation, most business was either on life support from the United States, in service to the United States, or defended by the US. That original $4 billion number from 2002 is far closer to the reality of Afghanistan outputs. 1 to 3 billion in minerals extracted annually, and the 1.5 to 3 billion in agriculture, including poppies. Agriculture and industry account for 23% and 21% of the economy respectively, with fishing and forestry playing tertiary roles, but a massive 56% dedicated to services. What services? Whatever services USA and their allies needed. A lion's share of this 56% of dedicated to services will most likely evaporate into a classic resource curse related crisis. What is the future of the Afghanistan economy? The Taliban have deep ties with the Arab world that will define the future of Afghanistan now that they are in control. This may come as a surprise to some viewers, but Afghanistan and Iran are not historically Arab countries. The significant Arabic populations that now exist largely came to inhabit the area with the advent of the Saur Revolution and the war with Russia. During this period, large numbers of militants moved from the Arabic world to defend Afghanistan from being annexed and exploited by the USSR. Osama bin Laden is originally from Saudi Arabia, and bin Laden's mentor Abdullah Yusuf Azam is from Palestine. Historically, Afghanistan was a country much like Switzerland. It was the space left over between great powers. It was a landlocked country that was defined by neutrality. The Taliban, however, is about as far from neutral as you can be. This change to demographics will likely shape trade, causing the nation to favor Middle Eastern partners over Russia or India. There are exceptions to this though. So who are they likely going to be aligned with going forward? No country comes without baggage. Economically, China makes sense. Afghanistan shares a border with China so old that it was one of the primary methods of traveling to China via land in the time of the Silk Road. The Wakhan Corridor, this crossing between the two nations, is unique for more reasons than one. Stepping across the border from Afghanistan to China jumps you forward 3.5 hours, the largest time change of any border in the world. It is one of the largest jumps in wealth across any border, being the 17th in the world, and this border is the smallest border on the country with the most countries bordering it. China is tied with Russia at 14. China already has operations in the country, such as the second largest copper mining venture in Afghanistan history, giving China access to your resources in exchange for much needed rents to secure the new country and gain the Taliban, arguably their most important ally. What does China have to say about a union? We would consider reopening it after the situation is stabilized and international recognition, including the Chinese government's recognition of the Taliban regime, take place, an unnamed source at the state-owned China Metallurgical Group Corp. (MCC) Group. Other traditional allies of Afghanistan include Pakistan and Iran. Pakistan is poised to be one of Taliban-led Afghanistan's closest partners. They share the Pashtun culture group and are both majority Sunni countries. Deeper trade and relations with Afghanistan gives Pakistan strategic and resource depth in regard to conflicts with India. Pakistan and China are as close as lips and teeth, and Taliban-led Afghanistan will likely step into this sphere of influence. Lastly, it's no secret that Iran has been a traditional supporter of the Taliban. Both are Islamic countries and have significant Persian-speaking populations, Farsi Persian in Iran and Dari Persian in Afghanistan. The Iranians are likely to be significant allies in the coming Taliban endeavors. The main cultural hitch will be Iran is a majority Shia Islamic country, whereas Afghanistan is a majority Sunni country. This led to conflicts and trade wars between Iran and Saudi Arabia in the past, but it is unlikely that Iran would engage in a trade war on these grounds when they've been getting crushed by sanctions for the last half-decade. These sanctions are those imposed by the FATF's, Financial Action Task Force's, blacklist, Iran and North Korea being the only two countries currently blacklisted. Most importantly, Iran received these harsh sanctions for supporting the Taliban within Afghanistan. If Afghanistan can avoid a conflict with their religiously opposed Western trade partner Iran, then Iran may end up seeing good returns on their funding of the Taliban. Everything considered, the biggest winners of the Afghanistan war are Pakistan, Iran, China, and Saudi Arabia. These countries now have either fulfilled ideological goals, gained access to rare resources at effective prices, or exercised Western influence from the region. The crossroads of Central Asia, Western Asia, and Southern Asia is no longer a detriment to trade between these powers. The real losers are obviously those in the West who wasted the time, human lives, and financial resources in failing to bring democracy and capitalism to this region of the world. But more importantly, the losers are the individuals who now live in the shadow of this regime, or those who now have to flee the region in fear of the Taliban's vengeance for assisting Americans in the occupation.